I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's been my privilege to bring guests that teach us all about the law, how it does work, sometimes doesn't work, how it's made, enforced, sometimes not enforced, and why you should care. This guest that I'm going to be presenting to you today is one of my favorites. He's been on the show quite a few times. He's retired, but he's really not retired. He's a Republican, but he's never let that interfere with his brain. He's active. He's a citizen. He calls it the way he sees it, and it isn't always comfortable. I remember when I was an officer of the trial lawyers, he said the Democrats gave the trial lawyers a big wet kiss. That wasn't very nice, but then he's Mike Ellis. What would you expect, Mike? Welcome to the show.
Well, good to be with you, George. Good to see you, big guy.
Well, it's always great to hear from you. I don't know what's coming, and I'm ready to duck.
Well, the legislature, for the first time and I was in the Senate for 40 years. This is the first time that the legislature actually, I sense, is going to be, especially the Republicans, will be independent from the governor's office. We have never experienced what we're doing right now in Madison, where you've got a governor running for president of the United States. Tommy Thompson ran for president, after he moved out. Walker is running for president, and he's gone a lot. Now, this enables the legislature to feel their own oats. You're going to see more independence on the part of the legislature because Walker is gone. But being gone doesn't mean that he isn't involved. He has submitted a budget to the legislature, and then he left town, and he's gone, and he's campaigning for president. There's some serious problems in this budget, and probably the two largest ones. One creates a contradiction. And I hope my Republican conservative friends that live here in the Valley are listening. We have fought against redistribution of the wealth. A 40-year-old guy gets up every morning, he goes to the mill and he works. And he puts in his 8 or 10 hours a day, and at the end of the week, the government takes a big slice of his money. And they redirect that money to someone who didn't get up until 11 o'clock in the morning, went down and sat on a bar stool, shook dice, came home, took a nap, and went back to the bar. The biggest problem we have there is redistribution of hard-earned money by people that are working. There was a bill in the session a year ago. We were going to clamp down on food stamp money and how it could be spent. So they passed a bill that said, you may not get food stamps and use them for potato chips, candy bars, soda, etc., etc. That's not a bad idea because it's the guy that got up and went to work's money. Now we have 3 billionaires coming in here from New York. Eden and Jamie Dimon, and Dimon's ahead of J.P. Morgan. And they want the taxpayers to build them a $500 million stadium for the Milwaukee Bucks. They're going to ask you and I to get up not at 8 o'clock and go to work, but get up at 7 o'clock and go to work, and then take more of our money to build a stadium for 3 people, 2 of whom are on the Fortune 500 for being the wealthiest people in America. Now, if that isn't redistribution of the wealth, I'll eat my shirt. It is not a bag of potato chips. It is not a can of soda. It's not a Hershey bar at the grocery store. It's $500 million of someone else's money going to support these people who own a basketball team. The Republicans, there's a contradiction here. What we're doing is redistributing. We're taking my money from my horse ranch. We're taking the money of that guy and that woman that gets up and breaks tables or goes to work in the office. She's a tech genius. We're taking her money and we're redirecting it to people that easily could buy their own stadium. That has got to be nipped in the bud. We have heard that this is going to result in economic explosion in Milwaukee. It's going to change the landscape of Milwaukee. There have been studies done that show building a stadium does not have any ancillary benefit to a community. And that's it in a nutshell. So that's probably one of the biggest issues. People here in the Fox Valley have got to let their legislatures know that, fine, if you want to have a stadium, then you should build your stadium. If you're asking me to give you food stamp money, that money should go for milk and nutritional food, not for junk food. But if we're critical of the junk food, we should be critical of the semi backing up to the garage of every working person in the Fox Valley and hauling off between 150 and 200. Walker wanted 220 million. That is redistribution of the wealth, and the Republicans ought to be against it.
And in the meantime, we're trimming money to education. We're trimming money to the environment. We're trimming money to the DNR. We're having everybody else tighten their belt because we don't have any too much money in this state right now, do we?
Well, we've had that fight with the governor, and I'm not going to hide behind a bush. I think our first responsibility is to the public schools. My father put 8 of us through a Catholic grade school, but he did other jobs. He worked in the mill during the day, he tended bar at night, he refereed basketball games, he did all those things because he wanted us to get that schooling in a Catholic setting. That's the right of those people to do that. But it's difficult for me to wrap my arms around taking money from the public schools and shipping it off to a non-public school setting. And once again, we're having that battle in Madison. You brought up the DNR. There's another big flaw going on in this budget. Currently, and for the last, oh my heavens, 60 years, we've had a citizens board appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, to make policy for the DNR board.
Can you hold that thought,
We
Mike?
can go to that next.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. I'm George Curtis, and not so retired Senator Mike Ellis, and he was just getting into one of my favorite subjects, which is the DNR and the environment.
Well, the DNR historically has been run by a citizens board. The governor gets to appoint them. The state Senate has an opportunity to vet them and confirm whether or not they are appropriate. Once they're in place, the DNR board then establishes the policies through a process called administrative rules. To show that there's a good system in place right now, let's say the DNR board comes in with a rule dealing with phosphorus emissions into the water. The legislature has a joint committee for the review of administrative rules. It's made up of 7 assemblymen, 7 senators from both political parties. They have the last check on that rule. Remember, the board is appointed, but the legislature is elected. So the legislature, if they don't like that rule, they can stop it. The Joint Committee for the Review of Administrative Rules can modify the rule and tell them this is the way it's going to be, and if they refuse, they suspend the entire subject. And that gives the legislature, the elected legislature, the opportunity to control what the non-elected board does. But it's a good situation because you've got all branches of the government involved. You've got the executive branch and the governor. He appoints. The Senate, the legislative branch, confirms. Both houses can check on it. Now, under the budget bill that's before us today, all of that, for the most part, is gone. The board will no longer have policy authority. They will simply be appointed by the governor in an advisory role to the secretary. But let's stop the bus for a second. The secretary is appointed by the governor. The relationship here between the legislature and the governor is going to dramatically be changed. the legislature is giving away their authority to the executive branch, because these people on the board will no longer be able to make policy. Since they don't make any policy, they no longer have to be approved by the state Senate. So that knocks out the state Senate from confirming people, because they have nothing to do anyway. Secondly, the Joint Committee for the Review of Administrative Rules won't have any rules to review, because the relationship between the secretary and the governor will result in executive actions by the governor, which is not subject to review by the Joint Committee. Now, the legislature ought to wake up. If you give that authority to, I understand we've got Republicans, and I'm a Republican, and we've got a Republican governor. The day will come when you will not have a Republican legislature and a Republican governor. But beyond the Republican Democrat, our forefathers created a system in which they wanted balance between the executive and the legislature and the citizens. And that's being destroyed here. So the people ought to be aware of the fact that this is a very dangerous move. And in the future, if you give this authority to this governor or any governor, you'll never get it back. And you will have, in effect, tipped that teeter-totter between the executive branch and the legislative branch way in favor of the executive branch.
You made that point beautifully in an article you wrote to the Post-Crescent, and you took it one step further that really hit home with me. You indicated that there really is a fourth branch.
That's correct.
And that's the important one, and that's the one that I find is most important. Elaborate on that.
Well, there's three branches, as we all know from our grade schools. You got the judicial branch, legislative branch, and you got the executive. But because historically we have wanted citizen involvement in our government, we actually created a fourth branch when it comes to the DNR, and that is the citizen board. Not Democrat, not Republican, just very, very educated people that are interested in the environment and how things are done. Under this proposal, that fourth branch, the citizens, are actually being removed, and that's very dangerous.
Well, I think it's extremely dangerous because no matter who's in,
Yeah.
the pendulum, as you pointed out, swings one way and swings another way, and it's independent people like you that kind of call people's attention to, do you know what's happening? Wake up here.
Yeah.
Do you know what's happening? And if we take the people out of it, there's not much protection left.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. To get back to the other subject earlier about the funding of our schools, we have 856,000 kids in the public schools in Wisconsin, 420-some school districts. We spend about $10 billion a year educating the next generation. $6 billion of it comes from the state, $4 billion comes from the property tax. And somewhere along the line, and we've got great schools here, we seem to have been magnifying the dysfunctional Milwaukee public school system and then blowing that all over Wisconsin. I agree, we have a dysfunctional system in Milwaukee, but we don't have a dysfunctional system in Oshkosh, in Appleton, in Neenah, in Menasha. But in the last budget, there was no new money for those kids in the public schools, but there was more money for those going to the private schools. That seems to me to be a no-brainer. In my Senate district, even though I'm not the senator, but in my Senate district where I live, 96% of those kids in schools are in public schools, 96% of them. And yet, in the last budget, we had a fight like the dickens, and I was able to get $389 million more for public schools. Now, this time around, we're right back to where we were 2 years ago. There is no new money for public schools. When politicians say they're putting in more money in the school levies credit, or they're putting more money into the equalization aid, that is fine. They're putting more money in. But if you don't raise the revenue control on schools, if you don't raise it, You simply are replacing property tax dollars with state. There's no additional money. And people have to be aware of that at a time when we're living in a very changing atmosphere and environment. And we have to teach our children different today than we did when you and I went to school. Chalkboards and erasers have been replaced with computers. We can't short sheet those 850,000 kids. That battle is being played out right now. And so you who are watching this today should also be aware of the fact that our public schools, for the second 2-year cycle in a row, are getting practically nothing on the bread that's called a sandwich.
Let's take our second break, and we'll be back and find out how you really feel.
All right.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm George Curtis. My guest, Senator Mike Ellis. Always love to have Mike Ellis on the show because he calls them the way he sees them. He's got some legitimate concerns about lots of subjects and issues, and one of them is family care.
Well, you know, people that may not be familiar, we've established a family care program a long time ago in Wisconsin. It's a bipartisan creation. And what it is, it's an option to putting our elderly into nursing homes. On average, it costs about $46,000 a year to put a person in the nursing home. But if we can develop a program, and we have, called family care, they can stay at home, and the cost is in the low 30s. Now, in Wisconsin, we have a model for the nation. Family care is under the auspices of the Department of Health and Family Services. But they contract with 8 major providers in the state, all of which for the most part are nonprofits. They sign a contract with the state. And there's the big one in Milwaukee, there's one up here in northeastern Wisconsin. They then turn around and they contract out to provide, either for profit or nonprofit, services that can be provided and tailor-made for the elderly who are living at home. Family care. The result is one of the best programs in the entire United States. Now think about it again. You've got the state of Wisconsin. We contract with 8 not-for-profit managers in the state. What they want to do in this budget is eliminate those 8 areas and turn it over to the private insurance industry. Now, I want to get this straight. We don't go to the private insurance companies right now. Private insurance companies are for profit. The question I want anyone who is interested is ask your state senator, ask your state assemblyman, why are we moving away from a model that works to a for-profit insurance company like Aurora, take your pick. They're going to be there. The question I have, and nobody's answered it, will these services be better by going to a for-profit insurance company? And will we get those services at a reduced cost? Or will it cost us more and denigrate the services? Family care handles over 53,000 people in the state of Wisconsin right now. And only 2 other states, Delaware and I believe Kansas, have gone the route of a private insurance company. Now, private insurance companies, if you've had any dealing with the insurance industry, and we all have, the minute you have a rumpled fender, they send you a notice after 6 months that they're raising your premium. Are they going to raise premiums? Are they going to cost more to provide these services to the individuals? Is this a carrot being thrown to the insurance industry? Because nationally, $93 billion nationally is spent on this subject, and they're drooling to get their hands on it. So you got to ask 2 questions, and then I'll be quiet and go back to retirement. Are we going to get the same services from the private insurance companies? And secondly, are we going to get the services at least the same or a reduced cost? If they can't answer that question, then they should leave well enough alone.
Well, another thought, on other shows where you have been very forthright about your concerns and your suspicion, you often use the cliche, follow the money.
Yeah.
And one of your issues that people are starting to forget about, and they shouldn't, is campaign financing reform, where you taught me a lot about follow the money. You on the state level, McCain and Feingold on the national level, that was a very important issue, and I think it's more important today than ever before. What do you think?
Well, it is, but the problem we've had in the last 5 years is Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court decisions in the United case, which really started this, that said that, in effect, big unions and big corporations can be viewed as an individual. And therefore, they pretty much have dismantled not only what we were trying to do, which we couldn't get done, but they've now pretty much dismantled most of Wisconsin's campaign finance laws on the books. You can give all the money you want to a third-party group to run issue ads without them having to report that. But you're limited to how much you can directly give to a candidate. For the state Senate, it is $1,000 in a 4-year period. But you can give $100,000 to what we call a independent expenditure group. They don't have to divulge where they got their money, provided they don't say vote for or against George Curtis. If they simply say, call Mike Ellis and tell him he should quit beating his wife, starving his dog, and spitting on the grave of his dad. That is not expressed advocacy. But we all know what they're saying is don't vote for Mike Ellis because he's a skunk. Now that's the joke, but that's the tragedy. Big money, big union money, George Soros, the big Democrat. On the other side, you've got big corporation money. They are literally making the individual insignificant when it comes to selecting the candidates for public office. And it is the greatest tragedy to hit our democracy since George took his rowboat across the Delaware.
Mike Ellis, we're out of time. Always a pleasure. Thank you. A final word about the fourth branch of government, public citizen. Mike Ellis is a perfect example of a public citizen. Not secret corporate or union wealth, not big insurance companies or HMOs funneling money to buy elections at all levels, but an educated public citizen who reads, studies, asks questions, and renders opinions. It shouldn't be wealth over intellect. It shouldn't be corporate money over individual interests. It shouldn't be insurance companies and big corporate dollars secretly funneling money to destroy candidates. It should be educated people over wealth. That's you, that's me, that's Mike Ellis. I'm thankful for Mike Ellis, and that's my opinion.